I would like to share with you the 3 P's. These are 3 things that everybody needs to learn if we want to grow deeper, more sustainable, and authentic relationships. So the 3 P's, simply put, are called priority, number 1. Number 2 is called permission. And the third one is maintaining the right perspective. Now, whenever I think of the 3 P's, it actually reminds me of the story of the princess and the pea, the Hans Christian Andersen story. Hands up if you are familiar with the story, The Princess and the Pea. So we've got maybe 50% of the audience. For the rest of you, let me unpack this really quickly. I'm sure you came to hear fairy tales tonight. So this is a story about a prince who is greatly saddened by the fact that, well, he can't find a princess to be in relationship with. He has scoured the land, not just his kingdom, but indeed other kingdoms as well. And there were plenty of girls who put their hand up and said, I'm a princess, but it was all fake news. He couldn't find the real deal. And so he was greatly sad. One night, however, there was a great storm, and during the midst of this storm, while the family took shelter in the kingdom's castle, there was this at the front door. The king went down and opened the door, and there stood a young girl, a maiden who was completely drenched by the rain, and she explained, I got caught in the storm. I am a princess. Could it be possible that I could seek shelter in your castle tonight? The king said, a princess, you say? So he says to his wife, Queen, there's a young girl here who says she's a princess and she wants to seek shelter for the night. Invite her in, says the queen. And the queen secretly thinking to herself, yeah, a princess, eh? Well, let's put this idea to the test. And as she's making up the princess's bed for the evening, she puts a pea underneath the mattress and then puts another mattress and then another mattress and then another, 20 mattresses high, and then a duvet and then another duvet, 20 duvets on top of each other, and then put the princess right at the top. Not entirely sure how she got up there. But in the morning, everyone was eager to hear, so how did she sleep? And when the servant came in and said, how was your night? She said, well, I'm not entirely sure what was underneath the bottom mattress, but something was poking into my back. And in that moment, they knew she was a real princess. I'm not sure what Hans Christian Andersen was thinking, because in my idea, in my mind, that right there is not a princess, that's a problem. If something so small can bother you so greatly, that's gonna be a difficult relationship to enter into. But here is the point. The point is, if your pea is misplaced, it may well cause you problems and pain. So let's make sure that we've got our 3 P's in the right place, starting with priority. In the 1970s, there were a couple of researchers by the name of Frida Rebelsky and Cheryl Hanks who examined the amount of time fathers spent prioritizing their children. They interviewed dads and said, how much time on average do you think that you spend interacting, talking with your children every day? And on average, dads reported about 40 minutes or so. They said, look, life's busy. I've got work to do. I have to travel long distances. There's lots of traffic, so I leave early in the morning. I come home late at night. But, we'll do story time. We'll talk around the dinner table. So about maybe 40 minutes or so. But then what the researchers did was they wired up the children's clothing with microphones to record the actual interaction time between children and their fathers to see, indeed, whether or not the children were being prioritized. And what the researchers discovered that was on average, fathers spent 37.7 seconds every day actually verbally interacting with their children, which is pretty much enough time to say, grab your school bag, don't be late, good night, dear. Like, really? Is it really a priority to us? If you want to have deep and sustaining relationships that are going to be authentic and not fake, then don't just swipe right because it takes a second. Actually spend time prioritizing that individual. The truth is that most of us would do well to spend more time prioritizing the ones that we love, but let's be honest, we are living in a day and age which is just crazy busy. We've got so many competing interests. There's work, and then I've got my social network, and then I've got my health, I've got to look after my body, and then I've got church, and there's like so many balls that I'm juggling in the air. And that's why we actually need to create some margin in our lives. If we're always full up to the top, well, we're not as effective as what we could be. And we actually see this in Scripture. There's a really cool story about two girls. You might be familiar with this story. In actual fact, I was having this moment of deja vu before going, have I told this story before? I went through all my notes, asked several people, and people were like, I don't think you've told this story. And so if you've heard it before, you're going to hear it again. And my idea is that if it's not worth hearing twice, then it wasn't worth hearing once. The story, of course, is about Mary and Martha. And in this particular context or juncture of the story, Jesus comes to their house. Like the Lord is here. And so Martha's like, wow, we're going to go out and get some hors d'oeuvres and get some, caviar and like really bless him. And so picking up the story in Luke chapter 10 and verse 38, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was so distracted by all the preparations that had to be made, so she came in and asked him, Lord, don't you even care that my sister has left me to do all of the work by myself? Like, tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed, only one, and Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. There's a couple of things to tease out and notice in this story when it comes to the P of priority. Please note that Martha did not come and say, Jesus, can I please tag team with my sister? Can you encourage her to go in and prepare some hors d'oeuvres so that I can sit at your feet for a while? No, she didn't want to swap with Mary. She just wanted to make Mary busy too. This is a phenomena that we as human beings tend to experience when we feel hard done by, when we feel marginalized in some way. We think something is unfair, and so rather than rising ourselves to the status where it is equal, we like to bring other people down to our status. So if I feel broken, I want to break them to now we're even. Secondly, Jesus says to her, Martha, Martha, you are worried and upset about many things. And the only time that a person is really worried and upset about many things is when they have no margin. So what's margin? Margin is the gap or the distance or the difference between what you have and what you need. So for example, if you live about half an hour away from here and you know that tonight was starting at 7:30 and you leave at 6:30, you have zero margin. However, if you leave at 6:15 or maybe even 6 o'clock and you get here at 6:30 or 7, then you've got margin up your sleeve. You've got the capacity to have a cup of tea, talk to some people. Hey, how's your mum doing? I heard she wasn't doing very well, and we actually get to build relationship. And we've built in a little bit of a gap just in case there's bad traffic, just in case there's an accident, just in case it's raining. Because the moment the accident or the traffic happens and we have no margin, our stress levels go through the roof. Whenever pressure or time pressure is applied, our emotions get frayed, and the first thing to be affected are our fellow relationships. You are worried and upset about many things. And if you find yourself constantly worried and upset about many things, chances are you too might well do with a little bit more margin. How awesome that Jesus, like the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, the ultimate counselor, gave Martha some awesome advice. But it didn't just happen once. Check it out. It happened again. John chapter 12, verse 2 to 6. Here a dinner was given in Jesus' honor. Martha served while Lazarus was among those reclining at the table with him. Then Mary took about a pint of pure nard, an expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of perfume. Do you notice anything? Nothing's changed. Even though Martha gets the advice from the greatest counselor of all, couple of chapters on, and we're right back to where we started. What does it say? Mary is sitting at Jesus' feet, wiping his feet, filling the room with perfume, and where's Martha? Still in the kitchen, busy serving. When we become busybodies and don't actually prioritize our relationships, it would be an indication that we're living in the Western, civilized, colder climate world. It's an interesting phenomena. Anthropologists have actually examined this. The warmer the climate, the slower we tend to go. The colder the climate, the more efficient we become. Not only that, but the older the culture, the more rigid the traditions, the customs. And the newer the country or the culture, the more flexible and relaxed it tends to be. This is why when you go to perhaps some of the warmer places, whether it be in Asia or Africa or Latin America, if church starts at 10 o'clock in the morning, that person is like, well, it's 10 o'clock. I better start getting ready for church. Because this is church. Getting ready now. Which outfit am I going to wear to bless the Lord? And then I finally dressed and I walk out of my house and then I see, old man Bill tending his garden. How are you, Bill? I haven't seen you around. And I have a chat with Bill for about half an hour. Why? Because this is church. I might not actually get to church until 1 o'clock in the afternoon, but don't worry, the service won't actually start until 3. And when it does, it will go for 4 hours. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? In other words, the warmer climate cultures tend to prioritize relationship over productivity. Not so in London. It's a little bit cold and you all are old. And so this culture dictates that, well, if church starts at 10 o'clock, then it will precisely start at 10 o'clock. I have got 35 minutes to speak, and then at the 35th minute, the hook will come out and grab me and pull me off the stage, or the stage will open up, I will fall through. And so we are punctual. The Swiss trains run on time. Not necessarily the trains in England, just in Switzerland. Deeper, more sustainable, authentic relationships with someone, if you want this, then we would do well to prioritize our time with them. And the same goes for having a relationship with God. Do we give him our first fruits or do we give him our leftovers? I'm so busy, God. So okay, I'm quickly brushing my teeth and dear God, thank you for today. And gotta go to the toilet. And maybe I shouldn't pray while I'm on the toilet, because some of the stuff religious is about, I'll wait till I go, flush in the toilet. And now I can continue on with my prayer, God, as I'm running to the bus. And then, okay, in Jesus' name, amen, as I walk into the office. And that was, yes, I prayed. Like I ticked it off the list. If you're ticking something off the list, then it's almost like an obligation. It's like, I have to buy that person a birthday present. How much money do I have? I've got $15, so let me not spend more than 10. And so we start to go through the motions of just checking the boxes as opposed to, no, I want to be able to be generous with this person, because here's the principle. You can give without loving, but you cannot love without giving. If you love someone, it's a natural default position that you want to bless them. Don't just bless them with material goods. Prioritize your time with them also. Number 2 is called permission. And this is an interesting one, perhaps not so much what we might think. It's not about allowing somebody or giving them permission to enter into a relationship with me because I am so awesome. It's kind of a little bit like our relationship with coffee. In Australia, we love coffee. It was published in the New York Times that coffee is to Australians what chess is to Russians. And when it comes to coffee in America, not so much London, you guys are doing well and truly above and beyond the Americans. But when it comes to coffee in America, we in Australia say, America needs Jesus. The coffee is so bad. But when you take it over to Germany, especially Berlin, like in Australia, we ask, man, I don't know if your coffee is good enough for me. But in Berlin, they say, I don't know if you are good enough for our coffee. So when it comes to this idea of permission, it's not just whether or not we're giving somebody permission to enter into a relationship with me because I don't know if you're good enough for me and if I'm good enough for you and so on and so forth, but actually it's when the relationship starts to hit some speed bumps. Because every relationship does. We go through the forming stage of getting to know somebody. It starts to get familiar with us, so forming turns into norming. But then comes the storming stage, where we will have some interactions where we don't actually agree on some certain things, or you said something that I completely disagree with. Could have been the football team or the political team or your political bias towards one particular thing or another, or a hot topic on that everyone's talking about, and I have a different view to you, and now what happens? And all too often, we get offended by what somebody says. Now, it could be that they say it because they are so passionate about this topic that they think if you don't share their worldview, then you must be some special kind of stupid. And then you go, how offensive. But here's the point. No one can offend you without your permission. In order for you to be offended, you are complicit in the offense. You are actually giving that person permission. Please offend me now. Here's my heart. I'm opening up. Please stab multiple times. But if we're not careful, we might actually end up developing a victim mindset. And if we develop a victim mindset, what naturally follows is an attitudinal disposition, and it's not very friendly for anyone, especially if you are like me. I was asked not so long ago to speak at a women's event on the topic of female hormones. I'm like, really? Can you not get a female to talk on this topic? Like, really? And no, we want to know, do female hormones, when it comes to the topic of mental health, does it hurt, does it help, or does it hinder? Can't you speak into that? I'm like, oh, yes, I can speak into that, but surely it would be better, and we can't find it. We want you. I'm like, okay. And so I flew over to New Zealand, and then, of course, I stood up on stage, and everyone's like, what? We have to have a guy? Like, what is up with this? What is this problem? And so I just said, look, this is New Zealand. You're all about equality, right? And so I'm just doing the thing in reverse. If it's true equality, it goes both ways, right? So what seems to be the problem of having a guy up on stage? But here is the problem. Because if you're easily offended, well, those who have a victim mindset, equality, well, that looks like oppression. Just get quiet in here all of a sudden. It's only going to get quieter, I'm sure, because for those accustomed to victimhood, it doesn't matter how good things get. Inequality, injustice, and injury are default emotional settings. Fighting against oppression, however, it gives a person a sense of meaning. It's like, this is unjust, so I've now got a cause to fight for. But you're fighting always against something as opposed to living for something. And so when you hang around with such individuals, it doesn't take long before you're like, I'm just not sure I want to hang out with so much toxic negativity like all the time. Like it's all they ever speak about. They've got to be in their bonnet. It's like, oh, you won't believe what happened here. And I saw this and I saw this documentary and I read this and I did YouTube and oh, you were Donald Trump. And the moment Donald Trump is measured, you know it's all over Red Rover. Instead of dusting oneself up and standing back up again, the victim mindset, just like we learned with Martha, has this way of dragging others down too. Even if we're not at fault, but we're hanging around such individuals. So let us not become such an individual. Be on guard not to be offended so easily. It's not just about being offended, but also encouraging ourselves not to be offensive. Like it kind of goes both ways, but the truth is, every now and again, we are going to be offensive. In fact, you might have already been offended tonight. But I actually think that offense, well, actually could be a healthy thing, because it allows us to have to work through our own issues. Like, why is this a trigger point for me? It allows me to engage in what Jesus specializes in, which is forgiveness and reconciliation. You know that if you're pressing somebody's buttons, well, it's a little bit when you go to the doctor and you've got a sore leg and the doctor puts you up on the bed and says, okay, I want you to tell me when it hurts. And so they press, and then all of a sudden they get to the sore spot. And you go, ah! And now we've just identified where the sore spot is. And when you've got the sore spot, well, now you can deal with it. In other words, if we get offended, we've got a sore spot that needs dealing with. If somebody's always pressing your buttons, maybe it's time that you actually did some introspective reflection to ask the question, why is it that I'm so easily offended? If your P is misplaced and you are giving people permission to manipulate you into being offended, then you lack wisdom. Let me explain. Am I getting more offensive? I get just like... Here's the deal. We're not just living in a day and age where we easily get offended. We're actually living in a day and age where we encourage others to get offended. But if you're allowing yourself to be manipulated into getting offended and go, yeah, that's not right, and now I'm going to get worked up because somebody else told me I should, that lacks wisdom. And here's why. The theme of tonight is to build deeper, more sustainable, authentic relationships. And if you are constantly being offended, then you will actively destroy every relationship that you will enter into. I hope that wasn't too offensive. We can offend people when we say no to what they want us to do. Can you please help me out? No, sorry, I can't do it today. We can offend people when we speak the truth. No, well, that's what the Bible says. Sorry. Or we can be offensive when we highlight an error. Hey, when you keep on doing that, it just actually frays our friendship. And so I want to bring it to your attention. Now, a true friend will bring it to your attention. The person who doesn't bring it to your attention is like the person who doesn't point out, oh, you've got salad in your teeth. Oh, you've got your flyers under, or you've got toilet paper hanging out the back. And when your friends don't tell you that stuff, especially before you walk up on stage, they're fake friends. Real friends are willing to take a risk for the benefit of you so that you don't burn through your relationships. And when they come, be humble. Here's the principle. We said it on our first night. Professionals pay for correction. Amateurs make people pay when corrected because they are so easily offended. Moving right along to a more positive topic, the third one is perspective. If we want to develop deep, sustaining, authentic relationships, well, we have to maintain the right perspective, especially when it comes to sharing with somebody or leading somebody. If you're in church and you're leading a department, or you're at work and you're the head of a department, or if you're in a family and you're leading your children, whatever it might be, if you're a leader in any way, you need to be influential. And to be influential, you need to be persuasive, because it's all about buying and selling. Tonight, I'm trying to sell you some ideas and I hope that you buy into them. It's all about buying and selling. But if you are trying to be persuasive, well, you need to learn the art of persuasion. And if we're going to talk about perspective and art, I thought it might be good for us to actually take a look at a piece of art. This right here is the famous Michelangelo 1499 painting, which is called The Creation of Adam. But if we were to zoom in a little bit on God right now and have a look at him, you might see a couple of interesting things. One is that God is reaching out to man with great intent, wanting to be in relationship. Man is kind of a little lackluster. Not only that, but God's not the only one in the image. There are other people in the image as well. But it may well be, when it comes to perspective, sometimes we might not see the forest for the trees. Sometimes there may be things hidden in plain sight. Because it wasn't until the 1960s that a doctor realized, actually, you know what? This picture of God is the exact anatomical structure of the human brain. Now, it's interesting when we have a look at this, God's arm is going through the very front of our brain, and the prefrontal cortex is what separates human beings from the rest of the animal kingdom. Art critics argue, however, this is just because Michelangelo painted this in because God is just a figment of man's imagination. Whereas other critics have come along and said, no, he painted God into the brain or the brain into God because God should always be on man's mind. But for the disagreements that the art critics have, this much they all tend to agree on. Let's go back to that slide again and have a look at some of the other people that are in this picture. And underneath God's arm is a lady that art critics pretty much all agree is referred to as Lady Wisdom. Lady Wisdom is personified in the book of wisdom. In other words, the book of Proverbs. But Proverbs is not just a book full up with wise sayings. The book of Proverbs is actually a tale of two very different persuasive women. One is called Lady Seduction, and the other is called Lady Wisdom. Let's take a look at the first lady. There's a poem that has been crafted in Proverbs chapter 7, and I'm going to start reading in chapter 6. I'll just read a couple of verses of it, but it says, "Looking out the window of my house one day, I noticed among the mindless crowd a simple, naive young man who was about to go astray. There he was walking down the street, then he turned the corner going on his way. As he hurried on to the house of the harlot, the woman he planned to meet. There he was in the twilight as darkness fell," picking up the story in verse 9, "convinced that no one was watching as he entered the black shadows of hell. That's when their rendezvous began. The woman of the night appeared, dressed to kill the strength of any man. She was decked out as a harlot, pursuing her amorous plan. Her voice was so seductive, rebellious and boisterous, she wandered far from what's right. Verse 21, he was swayed by her sophistication, enticed by her longing embrace. She led him down the wayward path into sin and disgrace. Quickly he went astray with no clue where he was truly headed, taken like a dumb ox alongside the butcher. She was like a venomous snake coiled to strike, so she set her fangs into him." Or another way of reading that verse would be to say, "Shopping at the mall, looking for some girl to buy. I saw this girl, she could rock my world. I had to adjust my fly. Introduced myself, hello, she said, you're a liar. I said, I got it going on, baby Joe, and I'm on fire. Took her to the hotel. She said, you're the king? I said, you'll be my queen, if you know what I mean. Let's do the wild thing." Now, if you are in the millennial generation, you have no idea what I just sung. If you are in the X generation right now, you'll be going, yeah, baby. Tone lock. The rest of you are like, what just happened? I was just simply articulating that might be another way of describing this particular passage of scripture. Here's the point to notice. His choice to give in was sudden, but her seduction was sequential. Now, don't get caught up on he, she, because this takes place both ways. In any relationship that we might have, and it's not just romantic relationships, it could also be business relationships. It could be a seductive investment that we go, oh, it sounds so good, and we get lured in, and then all of a sudden we've lost all of our money. we sometimes get manipulated because we have the wrong perspective. Never trust, for example, when we're starting to date with somebody, a hormone-driven decision because it's seductive. It's like, man, I just feel so right. How could it be wrong if it feels so right? And then all of a sudden, we now have our feelings confusing our reality. We need to maintain the right perspective. There are so many different things in this life that are so enticing, so seductive, and maybe we are sometimes the seductress or the seductor. Rather than trying to convince somebody or persuade somebody using seduction, we actually need to learn how to woo using wisdom.